Hello, I'm Ann Gritch, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this segment of the oral history of the Diocese of San Jose. And with me today is Father John Hurley, who is the Vicar for Evangelization for the Diocese of San Jose. So I'm sure we're going to have a very interesting conversation. Welcome, Father John.
Thank you, Ann. Very, very good to be here.
So first of all, can you tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up?
Well, I'm originally from the other side of the country, as one would say. I was born in Manhattan, touch of the Bronx, and then Long Island as a young child. And basically, I've been away from New York since I went to college. And that's when I was in serious discernment about my vocation. At that time, I wanted to be a missionary. And when I was growing up as a child, the only way you thought of being a missionary was going to a foreign land somewhere.
That's right.
So I was thinking of Maryknoll at the time. And they told me to think a little more about it. And so in the course of that time, when we always went to my uncle's house for holidays, he worked for the Paulist Press as a layman, my mother's brother. And during that time, I met the Paulist and began thinking about the Paulist community as missionaries to America. So I was still a missionary, but I think in a different context. But I think it was the changes that were going on in the church at the time. I graduated from high school in 1968. So it was right on the heels of Vatican II. A very exciting time, as one would say, certainly as a young person at the time. And that's when, mission was basically anything outside of ourselves. I was on a Catholic campus with hardly anybody going to chapel on Sunday. And that's when I began to discern that I didn't have to go 10,000 miles away to do Christ's mission.
And learn another language.
And learn another language, which I would have loved to have done, however. So, so I entered the Paulist and graduated from Catholic University in Washington, D.C., and did my theological studies in Washington. And then after ordination in 1976 as a deacon, I was sent to Portland, Oregon. And the first thing my mother said to me, "My God, John, what did you do wrong?" But I loved it. It was the most unchurched part of our nation, still is, even these years now. And we had an old church and school building that really was not being used at the optimum. And so I proposed that we turn that into an evangelization center in the Northwest, which we did do. And I was blessed to remain there for another 8 years after ordination to the priesthood.
Oh, so that was your first assignment?
So that was my first assignment, and that was when I really got engaged in evangelization. It was after the exciting document of Pope Paul VI, the Evangelii Nunciandi on evangelization in the modern world. And that's what had a profound change in my own life as I looked at that. So.
And a little time on the West Coast.
Yes, the church on the West Coast is very different than the church on the East Coast, and the church of the Northwest is very different than the church in California.
Yeah, isn't it true? Isn't it true? So what brought you to the Diocese of San Jose?
Well,
what did you know about us?
Well, later on in my priesthood, I was blessed to be sent to San Francisco, where I was pastor of Old St. Mary's Cathedral. For 6 years, and that's when I got to meet Bishop PJ. And so anytime I would come to Northern California, he and I would always arrange to have dinner together. And we've been friends ever since that period of time. So and that's was the connection with San Jose. But I also knew many of the priests that would be going back and forth between San Francisco and the Diocese of San Jose at that time. And that was part of the connection there. And so when 4 years ago, after I finished up in the Archdiocese of Baltimore, pretty much doing what I'm doing here in Diocese of San Jose, I asked to come back to California. I was 6 pastors ago at the time, so I figured, I could come back and return. And
so you became a West Coast
So
person?
I became a West Coast. I left my heart in San Francisco.
I'm glad.
And so that's what I did. And then when I came back, one of the first people I wanted to see, and Bishop PJ and I had dinner together. And he said, "I'd like you to meet the rest of his team." And I did. And The initiative for evangelization was at the very beginning stages as a result of some of the clergy study days. And so I began a consultative relationship working with Father Joe Kim, who was appointed right at that time in July of 14 as director for the Office for Evangelization, which was a one-person office at that time. And I had been consulting with Father Joe and the clergy and bishop during those 2 years.
And getting a sense of our diocese.
Getting a sense of the diocese. I had met basically all of the clergy at that point, many of the lay leaders in the church. I thought there were a lot of things that were primed to go. And then I think when the rubber needed to hit the road, so to speak, I think there were some bumps along that process. It's one thing to come up with an evangelization framework. It's another thing to put the car in drive. And that was when Bishop talked to me, and we shared some reflections on where we were and where we could possibly go. I had some suggestions for that, and then next thing was he offered me the opportunity to join the ship, so to speak. And I did. So actually it's 1 year ago today that I actually came on as Vicar for Evangelization for the diocese. And as you know, at that time, prior to my coming on, we had the Office of Pastoral Services, which basically embraces all of the pastoral ministries in the chancery. And so there were two key pieces. One was appointing me as his primary mover and shaker to oversee the evangelization framework that he approved back in 2016. And then actually to do the reorganization that was necessary, or what I would sometimes say in planning language, to really develop a different paradigm for how we do mission from the diocesan center. It's not about us coming up with lots of nice programs and those sorts of things, but how do we collaborate and let this new evangelization framework be the guiding instrument for all of the pastoral ministry in the life of the church. So that was what I was tasked with at that time. It's hard to believe, or people when I share this, that I'm 3/5 time. But I'm here as needed, but I'm also have other responsibilities that I'm doing, but I'm phasing some of those out so I can be here more as well.
I see. Because I don't know how much of the history of our diocese that you know, but we have had, particularly with the pastoral offices, several, this would be the third major reorganization. So it was just interesting to me to listen to. I understand too that some of the offices are being expanded, or some of the ministries. I think I read that Family Life office, which we had in the past, and then it kind of fell apart, and now it's back.
Well, if I would say anything about any of our offices, they're all understaffed.
Oh yes, I know that.
Given the size of the diocese, so we're asking our directors primarily in each of the 6 offices to do momentous tasks. We've got the multilingual issues in the diocese as well, so whoever you have as a director, there are other needs and people we need to surround them with to be successful in that ministry, so we don't set up parallel ministries within one particular office. What part of the evangelization framework was that we do establish or reestablish, as you would say, the Office for Family Life and Spirituality, as I'm calling it. And so we hope to launch that. We're searching for a director now and hoping to launch that in July of 2018.
Great.
So we've also gone through a lot of transition among the directors in the department as well, which was part of one of the concerns that Bishop had. Can we stabilize who we have so that we're not in a time of what I think was some confusion with the framework as it was launched. And so I was really brought in to stabilize some of that and to help everyone that was remaining to be committed to the mission that we were entrusted to. And I think we're in a great place right now. We've hired several directors, and So I think, and the support staff is, again, doing momentous tasks. I mean, most of our administrative staff are staffing multiple people. So, and that's what I hope to do a little more resolving on in the coming fiscal year.
I wish you well. Yes, I think that would be a very good thing. I'm wondering, with the individual offices or pastoral ministries, how has their work changed, will change, just in terms of the emphasis on evangelization?
Yes, it's, I say sometimes changing culture in the church is like making a U-turn in an oil tanker. But I think it's moving in that direction. Fundamental question I always ask with the programs that are currently existing is, why are we doing them? If someone comes up with a new program or initiative, that the why and how does this fit into the overall goals of the evangelization framework for each of those goal areas. So I think we're being more focused on what we're doing. I think also we need to let go of some things. It's, I think, having been a pastor a few times and working with dioceses, we're always great at bringing on new things. But one of the exciting things is also to let go of some other things. And I think it's also empowering other people to take on some of those responsibilities if they're still essential and important to be done. So I think the way I look at diocesan leadership is to empower other people to do responsibilities within the diocese. Thus, the establishment of the 3 committees that guide the implementation of the evangelization framework, but also the subsequent committees that we establish in relationship to those larger committees.
As you know, I was the founding director of the Institute for Leadership and Ministry, so that's an area that's dear to my heart. And as you were talking, I was thinking that the ILM seems to me to be poised in a good place to be involved with this whole evangelization, since it is a question of forming leaders for the Church of San Jose.
And actually, I'm speaking with the group this evening, but I think this was one of the other things that, as you know, your successor is now looking forward to a very happy retirement, which I'm so grateful to Linda Conoricchio for staying on one more year, because she had hoped to retire last year.
I know.
But everybody else was moving on in the department, so she graciously offered to do one more year. We've become very good friends and had some wonderful meals together at our home.
Well, she's terrific.
Terrific. But one of the things that I did ask her to do is to reestablish the ILM Advisory Board, which she's been in the process of doing. So we actually have a meeting in another week with that. Because I think that will be a helpful body to the new director when they come on board. So I think, again, how can we engage key lay leaders in the diocese to assume some leadership responsibilities? If there's one thing I heard from Linda with regard to ILM, is that so often the graduates of ILM are underutilized within the diocese. So I've been trying to incorporate them into the various committees within the diocese.
It's music to my ears,
and
Father.
so I think that's the key thing. I think we have great challenges in the Diocese of San Jose.
That was my next question for you.
And I think in general, we have to cultivate leadership within the diocese to assume pastoral roles within the life of the church. We find ourselves in Silicon Valley, one of the most expensive areas to live in the country. Unless a church worker is coming in as a spouse to someone that's getting a big salary in the tech world or some related field, it's just not, people are not going to be attracted to coming into the diocese. I think this is one of our challenges. And I want to cultivate leadership in the diocese to see that they have an opportunity to have a lifetime of service in the diocese. But trying to live here and even own a home and those sorts of things are tremendous challenges, especially if you're single. So I am trying to engage younger, single, not necessarily single, but younger adults into the life of leadership in the local church, because if we don't cultivate that group now, we won't be able to hold on to them.
Yeah. What about our multicultural folk? Where do you see the leadership there?
Well, I see we're blessed, I think, in some unique ways in our diocese. I think our two other principal languages beside English are Vietnamese and Spanish, but we also have many other cultures in the diocese. I found out just recently that the city of San Jose is the most diverse city outside of New York City.
Really? Oh.
And most of that is because of the tech world.
Mm-hmm.
That people literally come from all over the world, from different faiths, different cultures and ethnicities. And that's the great potential for life in the Church of San Jose, if we really take our mission seriously. That we just don't put it under a bushel basket, but we let it shine and live a life in a way that invites other people to ask us, why are we so optimistic and hopeful and energetic in those ways? And hopefully the answer would be that Christ has something to do with that in our lives.
I'd like to think so.
And I think when we look at the Vietnamese community, I think we're going through some generational changes there. Yes, we have newer immigrants in the Spanish-speaking community coming in, but the Spanish-speaking community has been here for generations.
I mean,
many of them actually woke up one time and found out that this part of California was no longer a part of Mexico. Mm-hmm. So I think when we look at the newer immigrants, raises certain challenges, but we also have in the Hispanic community people that go back generations and are bicultural. And then we have the Vietnamese community, newer in some ways. We are the largest city of Vietnamese outside of Vietnam. And that brings with us various challenges. They tend to focus more in a microcosm within their own. They're a church within a church. Mm-hmm. For a lot of very obvious reasons, most of them being immigrants at this point and just beginning second and third generations. And with that brings cultural conflicts within their own culture.
Sure.
As people get acclimated to the U.S. society in its multiplicity of cultures, it's harder to preserve the root culture. What I would like to see us do is to preserve that family culture in such a way so they don't go the same way that all of the European American communities have done in losing that family bond. But we have challenges that confront that, and the largest part of confronting that are cell phones and the internet. And
exactly.
As I say, social networking is anything but families talking with one another and sharing a meal together and these things. So those are some of the spirituality part of family that I would like to see incorporated into the new Family Life and Spirituality Office. It's really who we are as family. And then how do we guide and accompany couples that are preparing for marriage? What are going to be the non-negotiables in their family life? Are they going to have a meal together with their children, uninterrupted by technology? Right. And these sorts, because this is what I feel for our younger people today, is losing that social dimension. But we also have their parents' generation who are equally as attached to technology as well.
It's true. I can remember growing up, the rule was no phone calls when we were having dinner. Which really seems so antiquated now with all the other technology. But that principle, I think, is really important.
And then we begin to understand why one of the other challenges with liturgy is that we don't understand the concept of meal.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So I think there's a relationship. We have the domestic meal and we have the community meal. So.
Yeah, right. Tell me your vision for the Church of San Jose. What do you see as our future?
Well, I think we live in an exciting time. I think I always believe that challenges test the fiber of a disciple. And I think challenges excite disciples. We always try to be open to the Spirit and find ways to accommodate the needs that are before us. I think the other thing that I think is extremely exciting is the call to discipleship that Pope Francis is bringing to the life of the church. It's relational. It's accepting people where they are and accompanying them to a deeper, more intimate relationship with the church. And I think that's the key to the millennial generation for us today. Because the millennial generation is relational. You can't start talking into the head unless you've developed a relationship with somebody. So we accept them where we are. person comes into my presence. I learned a long time ago in Oregon when the phone was our main means of communication. And I'm talking to this young gentleman on the phone because he had seen an ad in one of the newspapers, and well, all this outreach to Catholics, maybe they'd be open to talking to me. And he's going on the phone, and at a certain point, I had a feeling it was something to do about sexuality. And so I needed to go somewhere else, and I said, well, what is it you'd like to talk to me about? And he said, Father, would it make any difference? And I've never asked that question again in 41 years of ministry. And I think that's exactly where Pope Francis is picking us up today. Meet people where they are, smell the sheep, and sometimes it's not very pretty.
Exactly.
It never is with sheep, actually, you know. And I think that's, I think a piece that that Pope Francis is trying to bring to this, encounter people where they are, and then accompany them with the gospel as your source of inspiration, motivation. I've always been a firm believer that if we live our lives the way the gospel expects us to as disciples, then people will ask us questions. And then we can share why. And I think that's very much, a vision of, it's not evangelization as a task. I think it's that whole sense of missionary discipleship that Pope Francis is challenging us. We're not a missionary or a disciple. We are missionary disciples. We're always driven by mission. And so that's what I'm trying to bring, I think, among my brother priests in the diocese and brother deacons. Put the heart into the homily. That's one of the major focuses of
Absolutely.
In our worship liturgical commission, which was the worship committee as from the framework, and this is what Francis is talking to us about. If the heart's not in the homily, you're not going to connect with people. Catechesis is not about a head trip. It's about communicating the teachings of Jesus. And maybe we need to ask ourselves, what would Jesus do in each of those situations, and act accordingly, because we've got a lot of change to do in that. So my vision is to bring a sense of joy and excitement to what we do. I think no matter what meeting we're in, I think it's about hospitality, that we don't take people for granted. So when I have a clergy gathering or those sorts of things, I know my brothers are busy in their parishes and those sorts of things. So how we welcome them and not take them for granted and these sorts of things, begins, in my relationship in building those bonds with the brother priests and deacons. And the lay leaders in the community. I always go to them rather than asking them to come to me. And that's a breath of fresh air for me to be able to
get out of the office.
And I think there's that sense, I just think we're blessed with our young people in the diocese. Shortly after I took over as vicar last year, I went to a diocesan youth retreat up in Lake Tahoe with over 260 young people, and I was a little anxious. It's not my usual venue, but I actually had more fun with them than I have at a lot of adult things. But I think the excitement, but they're grounded, and then when you listen to their fishbowl sessions and those sorts of things, the things that they're dealing with in their lives today were things you and I never had to deal with.
It's true.
And how the darkness of culture sometimes is infringing on them, and in vulnerable moments they succumb. I think for us, I believe firmly that we as church can be the antidote to the darkness in society around us. And so our gathering and youth events is really about listening them into existence within the life of the church.
Yeah, that was one of the finer things that youth ministry did, 25 years ago. I remember when we had that first Tahoe gathering, and people were kind of nervous if it was going to work, and every year it seems, then the fathers come back loving it.
I think one of the things that that stood out for me last year is for the Wednesday night, we have confessions. Over 20 priests came from the diocese to hear confessions. Some of them came up in the morning and drove back at night.
That's right.
And so I just think they were extremely blessed, and how important it is to the kids to just see their priest there.
Absolutely.
And I think, so I mean, that continues, and but I just think we're also, something new that we've added in that area is to do a middle school diocesan youth retreat, which was launched this year. So that's kind of piggybacking on that. It's a shorter time frame.
Also
a
at
two-day
Tahoe,
event. No, it'll be done in the local area, so that the parents can drop them off, these sorts of things. But it's got an intensive day, and I think so. We're also looking at the Confirmandi retreat. We had the largest one with about 1,400 this year. So I think as I work with our youth team, it's really making it more formational, which is a thrust of the evangelization framework. That's my rule. Let's keep going back to that. If it doesn't have something to do with that, then we don't need to be doing it. But it's not that we do away with things, but that we can bring the formational component, where I think we went through a phase of youth ministry where it was always about mega events.
Yes.
That were a high moment, a shot of adrenaline. But I think we can also make them very spiritual and formational without, teaching them didactically, and to talk about their faith experience. What are their common denominators and those sorts of things, and then to strengthen that, to give them permission to talk about God, which they don't feel comfortable doing anywhere else, and sometimes even at home. Because I believe today our young people are the means to evangelizing their parents.
Can you say a little more about that?
Well, I think when we look at it generationally, when I work with our catechists and directors for faith formation in the diocese, we talk about parents and grandparents. And one of the things I love to do is I'll say, yes, who are the parents today? The parents are the earlier millennial generation and the ending of Generation X. The grandparents are the beginning of Generation X and, just before them. And so that's the generation we're talking to. But sometimes Generation X, which were the fruits of the boomer generation, very often their parents would say, well, I'll let them make up their mind when they become,
I've heard that.
when they get married or older. So we didn't baptize them. So they getting married in the church, and all of a sudden they say, Mom, where did I get baptized? I need a copy of my baptismal certificate. And then you have the come to Jesus talk. Well, Dad and I thought we'd let you make up your mind when you got older. That's the generation we're dealing with, which I have the way I describe it, we're dealing with an uncatechized generation through no fault of their own. But at least they're bringing their children to faith formation. Many of them putting them into Catholic school, but the grandparents are very often paying for that. And I think this is, so I don't care what the circumstances are, but to just see these as opportunities if we become aware of who's there. And I don't care that they're uncatechized. Sometimes it's much easier in this day and age to catechize them with where the church is today in 2018 than trying to undo where the church was in 1840.
This is
which
true.
is where some people, I think, would like to go in the church today.
Yes, I'm afraid
Fortunately,
you're right.
they're in the minority.
Yes. What do you see as the strengths of the Diocese of San Jose?
Well, I see the strengths in the diocese is its rootedness in the gospel of Christ. And I think that goes back to the establishment of the diocese, that the Archdiocese of San Francisco saw this as a viable and fertile ground in more ways than one, mostly farming territory back in those days in the valley. And I think that's one plus. I think that we're grounded in that. I think the other gifts that the diocese has is the reality that we are a global church. Let me say, we're a global community, and we're an ethnically diverse church. Every culture in the world that you would want to find is somehow in Santa Clara County, which is the Diocese of San Jose. But I think for us, we're blessed with the Hispanic culture and richness of that tradition that blesses the church. We're blessed with the Vietnamese culture and tradition through all of that they bring to the local church. And I think the European American communities that are represented 6, 7 generations long, I think see that. I think, as I say, sometimes St. John Paul II often said that the church in the United States is richly blessed by cultural diversity.
Amen.
But having worked at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops for almost 9 years, cultural diversity brings with it many challenges, and many bishops might sometimes say headaches, as pastors would say that sometimes too. I think it's stepping back and smelling the richness of that stew that we have fermenting in front of us and how we can respond to it. Yeah. Liturgically, catechetically, as I often say to any catechist, regardless of their ethnic and cultural background, if you have people in front of you that are not of your ethnic or cultural background, then you need to find out about those individuals that are sitting in front of you. Mm-hmm. I'd say that to a Vietnamese teacher that has Filipinos or Latinos sitting in front of them at the same time. That's the classroom. That's the congregation in our churches. I love it sometimes when a pastor might say to me, well, John, we don't have any of them here. I said, look at your congregation. Right. So I think, look at the parents in school, the mixed cultural families that we have, blended families that we have in the life of the church today. These are not problems to be solved. These are opportunities to really celebrate who we are as church, because the church is a universal community, and we are a mere microcosm of that in the Diocese of San Jose, and even more so in Santa Clara County.
Yeah, I was thinking,
and I find that to be exciting.
Well, it is exciting. So, it's absolutely wonderful. You know, as you were talking, I was also thinking of the Korean community and the Chinese community that are so involved in the diocese, who have their own leaders that are just doing wonderful things. When I found out the Chinese community sent their young people to Tijuana to build houses, I thought, this is marvelous. This is just absolutely.
And my background in San Francisco is at that time, most, Old St. Mary's Cathedral is located right next to Chinatown, right. And it was mostly the Cantonese community, where, we've seen demographic shifts over these so few years, and most people emigrating now from China, the younger generation, all speak Mandarin. Yeah. So our community, larger Chinese community here, are Mandarin speakers, but they also have an English Mass there.
And a Mass in Cantonese.
And a Mass in Cantonese and Mandarin. Yeah. So I think, and the pastor is a priest from Argentina.
Exactly, I love it.
So great friends with Father Oliveira, but that comes from his missionary work in Taiwan when he was a missionary there. So, and I think those are the exciting things to see how we can minister to each other in so many different ways. And the Faith Formation Conference that our department oversees, is reaching out to all of these different ethnic communities. So last year we had keynotes in English and Spanish, Vietnamese, Cantonese, and Mandarin. So I think these are exciting ways that we're trying to respond to recognize the richness of that diversity and bless it at the same time.
Exactly. How about the Valley Catholic? It seems to me that would be quite an instrument for you.
Well, it is and it isn't. I think it's, again, the demographics of our time. I think the Valley Catholic as a newspaper, I think, speaks to a certain generation. And I think it's not speaking to our young adult generation. It's not speaking to our youth and those in the tech world that do nothing in paper.
I know.
And if that's the majority of the people in our diocese, the parents and grandparents that are home, how do we communicate with them more through electronics and social media and those sorts of things? So I think one of the things we're working on at the Chancery, and actually we have a meeting this week, on the digital evangelization. And I think that's how do we get the news out instantaneously so that things that are in the Valley Catholic aren't old news all the time when it comes out a week or two later. So.
I know a lot of the parishes have e-bulletins now.
Right. Yeah. And this is not just a, 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 Diocese of San Jose issue. Every diocese
sure
is
not.
going through this. I think the key thing for diocesan paper, or communications, I might add, is for a way for the bishop and his key colleagues to be able to communicate with the diocese. And there are more effective ways than the printed form today. So.
We've done a lot of talking. What else should we be talking about?
Well, I think, I think the key areas that we're looking at with regard to the evangelization framework that I think it's underestimated at times is because that's my framework for the department. So I look at it as a three-legged table. Looking at word, worship, and witness are the three focus areas that the department is looking at. But word, worship, and witness is not just one office. Formation is a part of every one of the offices. Prayer and worship is a part of all of our offices, but like the youth office when we do the retreats or these sorts of things. And then there's the witness component. There's no point in opening the gospel of Jesus Christ and being called to witness and close the book and say, I'm not interested.
Yeah.
I'm fine on the believing side, I'm fine on the worshiping side. And that, I think, is what Pope Francis is raising the bar on. We've done enough on the faith formation. Some are so overeducated that they can't be open to anything new. But I think worship life, liturgical life is all over. But how can our Sunday experience be the source and summit of our parish life and diocesan life? That people walk away from church truly encountering Jesus, not only in the Eucharistic bread, not only God in the living word that was proclaimed in a way that it was alive, and also in the music, but I think in the homilies as well. And I think those are the focus areas that we'll be working on. So all three of those committees are fully operative. We just, over the past year, the Liturgical Commission had not met in a number of years. I'm not into resurrecting things from the dead. I'm more about then, well, let's create something new. So I propose that the Worship Committee become the Liturgical Commission rather than recreate something. And we're probably going to look at the words that were used in the evangelization framework. I think were visionary words. I'd rather have titles of these committees that are more operative. So we are discerning right now, the Worship Committee would be the Social Justice Commission, and the Word Committee may be the Faith Formation Commission. So like the ILM Advisory Board would be represented on that. The catechumenate, newly created catechumenate committee will be in relationship to the Liturgical Commission, but it also has a formation relationship. So this past year, I think some have not seen too many things happening in the parishes yet because we were getting all these committees and leadership in place, and they're moving, getting ready to move in the fall.
Wonderful. Well, I'm very grateful to you for taking the time to be with us. As you were talking, I was thinking to myself about some of the other interviews that we've had of the folk who were at the very beginning of the diocese, and kind of the excitement and the challenge and just the enthusiasm. And I'm seeing that from you now. So it's just wonderful to see it continuing because, as you know, I love our Diocese of San Jose.
I think it's key, and I think this is what Pope Francis is calling us to, that in everything that we do, it needs to be filled with joy and gladness.
Amen. Thank you very much, Father.
You're very welcome, Ann. Thank you, and God bless.
Thanks.